When we talk about the Ummah rising again, we often jump straight to external events, victories, leaders, movements, or moments of collective strength. But history teaches us a very different truth. Every revival that ever took place in this Ummah began first inside the human heart. The turning point was never political, it was psychological. It was that moment when ordinary individuals suddenly saw themselves differently, realized their own worth, and understood the immense responsibility Allah had placed on their shoulders. Revival didn't begin with armies or institutions. It began with a shift in the way people thought, the way they lived, and the way they understood their relationship with Allah. There comes a moment in every person's life when they can no longer outsource their spiritual obligations to anyone else. That moment when a person stops blaming society, leaders, or circumstances and starts looking inward. That is the spark that ignites change. This is exactly what happened to the Ummah. The rise began when people recognized that decline was not a coincidence. It was the result of distance from Allah, distance from purpose, and distance from the values that once made this Ummah the moral conscience of the world. And the beauty of this realization is that it didn't create despair, it created clarity. It reminded people that strength is not something given. Strength is something earned through humility, sincerity, and a willingness to confront one's own shortcomings. When people began to ask themselves simple but powerful questions, where have I gone wrong? What am I neglecting? What does Allah expect from me? A different kind of revolution started. Not the kind that shakes governments, but the kind that shakes souls. And it is always the shaking of souls that eventually reshapes the world. This inward shift transformed passive individuals into active seekers of purpose. They no longer saw themselves as powerless victims of history, but as moral agents capable of contributing to a better future. That psychological transformation is what every revival in Islamic history has had in common. The greatest rise of the Ummah was not when numbers increased or wealth expanded. It was when individuals rediscovered their own dignity. They began to understand that honor is not attached to status or power, but to obedience. They realized that the real downfall of any community happens long before anyone notices it. When people lose their sense of responsibility, lose their connection to Allah, and lose their moral compass. And so, the revival began exactly where the decline had begun, inside the heart. What is profoundly striking is that this awakening was not loud. It wasn't something that made headlines, it was quiet, subtle, almost invisible. A man wakes up one morning and decides to fix his prayer. A woman chooses to realign her priorities. A young person decides to pursue knowledge with sincerity. These are small decisions, but collectively they become the architecture of a new era. And that is how the Ummah rose again, not through one grand moment, but through millions of private victories. Every individual who returned to Allah contributed to the collective return of the Ummah. And if you think about it, this pattern is not unique to history. It is the same pattern that governs personal change. No one transforms their life overnight. It happens through a moment of recognition, followed by intentional choices, followed by consistent effort. The Ummah is nothing more than the sum of its individuals. If the individuals wake up, the Ummah wakes up. If the individuals rise, the Ummah rises. So the question that hangs over all of us today is simple. Will we wait for someone else to spark change, or will we become the spark ourselves? Because the Ummah rises again the moment you rise within yourself. When the Ummah began to rise again, it wasn't merely a spiritual awakening. It was a disciplined return to knowledge and structured living. Knowledge has always been the engine of revival. Throughout Islamic history, every significant period of strength and influence began with people who understood the power of the mind, the clarity of thought, and the importance of structured learning. What makes knowledge transformative is not the accumulation of information, but the integration of what is learned into character, conduct, and daily life. It is not enough to recite words or memorize texts. Knowledge must shape the way we think, the way we act, and ultimately, the way we contribute to society. This principle became the foundation upon which the Ummah rebuilt itself. The revival did not happen overnight, and it did not happen in a vacuum. It happened in communities where people took seriously the pursuit of knowledge, not as a formality, but as a responsibility. Scholars emerged not only to teach, but to embody the principles they taught, setting examples of discipline, patience, and focus. Ordinary people, in turn, sought to emulate that dedication, realizing that true strength comes from preparation, understanding, and deliberate effort. Knowledge became the tool by which individuals reclaimed their confidence, their sense of purpose, and their ability to navigate the challenges of their time. When people began to study seriously, think critically, and act intentionally, the Ummah's decline was reversed, not through miracles, but through the disciplined application of intellect. Discipline was inseparable from knowledge. It is one thing to learn and another to implement. A person may memorize volumes of knowledge, yet without discipline, it remains inert. Revival required structure, discipline in prayer, in character, in education, in conduct, and in the management of time. Every historical resurgence of the Ummah involved societies where people committed to consistent effort, where actions aligned with principles, and where individuals and communities held themselves accountable. Discipline created consistency, and consistency transformed potential into tangible achievement. When people began to live intentionally, applying what they learned, the Ummah began to shine with new vitality. But perhaps most importantly, knowledge and discipline together restored identity. When the Ummah had strayed, it was not just politically or economically weakened. It had lost its intellectual and moral compass. By reconnecting with the Quran, the Sunnah, and the wisdom of their forebears, the people found clarity in who they were meant to be. The revival was not a return to blind imitation, but a careful, thoughtful reconstruction of principles in a way that addressed the contemporary context. Knowledge gave them tools, discipline gave them leverage, and together they rebuilt the Ummah from the inside out. Strength, they realized, is not something inherited. It is something cultivated, honed, and defended through constant effort. This combination of knowledge and discipline created leaders, thinkers, innovators, and scholars who would go on to influence the world. The Ummah rose because individuals no longer relied solely on external circumstances. They relied on their capacity to learn, to act, and to persevere. Knowledge without action is empty, and action without knowledge is blind. But when the two come together, the result is unstoppable momentum. History is full of examples where small groups of dedicated, disciplined, and knowledgeable people reshaped entire civilizations, and the Ummah is no exception. So today, the lesson is clear. If we wish to rise as a community, we must take knowledge seriously, not as decoration, but as transformation. We must embrace discipline, not as restriction, but as liberation from chaos and distraction. Revival is not a distant dream. It is the natural outcome of purposeful learning applied with consistency. Every act of sincere study, every moment of disciplined practice, brings the Ummah one step closer to its potential. If we seek to see our Ummah rise again, we must commit ourselves to this dual path, knowledge that enlightens and discipline that empowers. That is how strength is rebuilt, and that is how revival becomes reality. One of the most profound lessons from the revival of the Ummah is that strength does not come from numbers alone, nor from material resources, nor from political power. True strength comes from unity, the kind of unity that arises when people set aside ego, pride, and division, and work together for a higher purpose. History shows us that when the Ummah was fragmented, it was vulnerable. When it was united, it was unstoppable. Yet, this unity was never superficial. It was not forced by coercion or mere political necessity. It was a deliberate, conscious choice, a recognition that the collective good is far greater than the satisfaction of individual desires. And it was precisely this conscious commitment to unity that allowed the Ummah to rise again. The path to unity, however, is never simple. Human beings are naturally inclined to protect their interests, defend their egos, and cling to familiar divisions. Tribalism, sectarianism, jealousy, and suspicion are deep-seated tendencies, but the revival of the Ummah required people to confront these tendencies honestly, to acknowledge the harm they caused, and to actively work to overcome them. It demanded self-discipline, humility, and courage. The courage to prioritize the community over the self, the courage to forgive, and the courage to collaborate even with those we may have previously seen as rivals or opponents. This was not a compromise of principle. It was a higher expression of principle. It was understanding that the strength of the Ummah depended on the ability of individuals to rise above petty conflicts, personal pride, and narrow-minded loyalties. This kind of unity was never passive. It was active, intentional, and lived. It meant that when scholars spoke, leaders listened; when communities planned, individuals contributed; when resources were available, they were shared. Unity became practical, embedded in daily action, and expressed in countless small acts of cooperation and selflessness. It was the understanding that every person has a role to play, every effort matters, and every division that is healed strengthens the collective. In this way, unity became both a mindset and a methodology. It was not just about standing together in the streets or in public meetings. It was about building trust, fostering mutual respect, and creating networks of collaboration that made the Ummah resilient in the face of challenges. The beauty of this unity lies in its moral dimension. When people put the collective good above personal ego, they align themselves with a higher purpose. They begin to understand that their individual actions have ripple effects far beyond themselves. Jealousy, envy, and suspicion slowly fade when individuals see themselves as part of a larger mission, as contributors to a community that transcends personal gain. The revival of the Ummah demonstrates that unity is not just strategic, it is deeply ethical. It is a reflection of character, a manifestation of humility, and a sign of maturity. Without unity, knowledge, discipline, and purpose cannot reach their full potential. With unity, even the most modest resources become sufficient for achieving monumental results. This principle is timeless. It is as relevant today as it was centuries ago. The challenges we face may be different, but the solution remains the same. The Ummah rises when hearts unite. When we overcome divisions, when we choose collaboration over conflict, when we place the collective good above personal ambition, we unleash the true potential of the community. Unity is not easy. It requires sacrifice, patience, and constant effort, but it is indispensable. Every historical moment of revival was marked by a convergence of minds and hearts committed to a shared mission. And every decline was preceded by disunity, fragmentation, and distrust. So the question for us now is simple but profound. Will we allow differences, pride, or ego to hold us back? Or will we actively choose unity as a principle, a practice, and a purpose? The Ummah does not rise through isolation or individual brilliance alone. It rises when we see each other not as competitors, not as rivals, but as partners in a collective mission. True revival is the product of shared hearts and coordinated action. If we embrace that truth, there is no force that can stop the Ummah from reclaiming its strength, dignity, and purpose. The final piece in understanding how the Ummah rose again lies in the rediscovery of mission. a sense of purpose that goes beyond survival, comfort, or personal ambition. Revival is never accidental. It does not occur simply because people want change or because circumstances push them to act. It happens when individuals and communities reconnect with a vision that is bigger than themselves. The Ummah began to rise when its people understood that their existence was not meant to be passive, that they were not merely here to occupy space in the world, but to actively contribute, to build, to inspire, and to lead in accordance with divine guidance. Purpose became the engine of action, and action fueled momentum toward revival. This sense of mission begins internally. Every individual who contributed to the resurgence of the Ummah understood that life is not about comfort alone. They understood that true success is measured not by wealth, status, or fleeting pleasures, but by the impact they create, the values they uphold, and the legacy they leave behind. When individuals live with intentionality, they stop seeing challenges as obstacles and start seeing them as opportunities. Opportunities to act with courage, to display integrity, and to embody principles even when circumstances are difficult. The revival of the Ummah was built on countless acts like these. People choosing courage over fear, patience over impulsiveness, and contribution over complacency. The rediscovery of mission also reshaped priorities. People began to evaluate their lives in terms of meaning, not convenience. They asked, "What am I contributing to the Ummah? How can my life serve a greater purpose?" These questions are not abstract. They are practical, guiding everyday choices: how one spends time, what one studies, how one interacts with neighbors, and how one approaches leadership. Revival required a shift from short-term thinking to long-term vision, from seeking immediate comfort to investing in enduring impact. Every action, no matter how small, became a building block in the reconstruction of a community that had lost its direction. This is why the Ummah's rise was not merely political or military. It was moral, intellectual, and spiritual, rooted in the consistent, deliberate pursuit of purpose by millions of individuals. Purpose also inspired resilience. Challenges are inevitable in any effort to rebuild or reform, but a clear sense of mission provides an anchor. When the Ummah was confronted with internal strife, external threats, or material scarcity, those who understood their mission persevered. They did not give up because their efforts were tethered to something eternal, something greater than immediate results or recognition. This is a critical lesson. Revival that is driven only by circumstances or convenience is fragile. Revival that is driven by mission is durable. It can survive setbacks, adapt to change, and sustain momentum over generations. Mission gives the Ummah a reason to keep moving forward even when the path is difficult and the future uncertain. And perhaps the most transformative aspect of rediscovering mission is its ripple effect. One individual with a clear sense of purpose influences others. A community with a shared mission amplifies the impact. Knowledge, discipline, and unity, all the elements we have discussed, find their highest expression when paired with a clear vision. Mission becomes the lens through which every decision is made, and the force that aligns hearts and minds toward collective progress. Revival is not a product of chance. It is the consequence of conscious, purpose-driven action at every level of society. So, the challenge before us today is this. Will we allow life to drift in comfort and routine, or will we seek purpose in every action? Will we live for convenience, or will we live for contribution? The Ummah rose again when its people embraced a life of meaning, when they acted with courage, integrity, and vision. Revival is not behind us. It is waiting for those who choose to live intentionally, to pursue a higher purpose, and to align their individual efforts with the destiny of the Ummah. If we commit ourselves to this path, there is no limit to what we can achieve. The mission is clear, the responsibility is ours, and the time to act is now.